Hey guys, welcome back. So now we are getting back into Venom, now that Bedlam is no longer wrapped up in Dark Web. And it's here where we find the reasons why the events from Dark Web were necessary. Because now not only do we get the birth of the Bedlam child symbiote, but also we see the path to the 7th Venom begin. So with that said, let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so for this one, we pick up directly from the conclusion of Dark Web, where we had seen Chasm send off Bedlam away from the fight using the Scythe of Sorrows. And it's here in Venom issue 17 where we find out where exactly Eddie went. And I like how this is handled by both Ewing and Cafu, because as we see Eddie falling through limbo, above him we see the inverted New York that is actually in limbo. That's more or less a demonic parody that mirrors the New York City in their real world. And this is something that we got a closer look at during Dark Web when Chasm had Peter go to work at the limbo version of the Daily Bugle. And as we jump in, we're reminded that that version, that portion of limbo, is considered to be one of the human hells. But also as we see Eddie fall through limbo, Ewing reminds us of how Eddie's been falling his whole life. And right there, I do gotta admit that it feels like a bit of a callback / nod to Venom Volume 4, issues 31 through 33, when at the time Donny Cates took us through the analogy of how Eddie's been falling his entire life. And now with Ewing, we're given a voice that mentions the same, but it goes a step further with saying how in times like this, Eddie could use a hand. But on top of that, the messed up part is Eddie was sent here by people who he would have called his allies. And from the perspective of looking at where Eddie is now, who's gonna lend him that helping hand? Because from Eddie's recent experience, his quote-unquote allies, they didn't help him, they just used him and threw him away. And if you ask that same question about a stranger, we're shown how Cinch recognized that Eddie was going through something, and instead of helping him and lending out that hand, he instead just gave Eddie the fight that he was looking for. And from there, the same is said for his friends and even his own son. And all of this only shows us the more that Eddie is truly alone. But then from here, when Eddie hits rock bottom after falling as far as he can go, it's Bedlam who gets up. But at this point, with him falling all the way here, keep in mind that both space and time in limbo can be very tricky. Because right away when Bedlam gets here, he's confronted by a few techno demons, which for us right away is the first hint that he's gone back in time. And really with seeing this, it seems as if Bedlam had made his way back somewhere between the pages of New Mutants Volume 1, issues 46 through 50, and only for a brief moment, because throughout the course of this issue, we'll find Bedlam glitching in and out of different time moments in limbo as the story progresses. But I believe that this is about around the time where Bedlam has landed, because back at this time, Magus, who was once leader of the Technic race, had made a deal with the demon Sim, allowing him to use the transmode virus, which would transform anyone he touches into a techno-organic being. And back in New Mutants Volume 1, issue 50, we saw that Sim passed this along to a countless number of demons in limbo that Illyana had to fight off, and because of the weird time in limbo, she wasn't aware of how long she was there fighting. But also at the time, we were shown in a moment when one of these demons touched Illyana, passing the transmode virus to her. She was then able to cleanse that portion of her skin by using the Soul Sword. So keep this in mind as we continue throughout this issue. But while Bedlam's here, these techno demons, they of course try to touch him so that they can transfer to him the transmode virus. And when one of these demons reach out, Bedlam just grabs its hand and slams the mess out of it. But again, this is what they wanted, because for the demon to pass on the virus, all Bedlam had to do was touch him, which is what he eagerly did. But then it's from here where it gets pretty ridiculous, because as the transmode virus begins to cover Bedlam completely, it's here where we discover that a King in Black, or better yet, the King in Black, needs no Soul Sword to cleanse himself from the transmode virus, which is nuts, because the transmode virus would have worked had it just been the regular symbiote. But again, this is the King in Black we're talking about here. So regardless of the Bedlam phase that he's going through at the moment, he's not lacking the power. But instead at this point, Eddie just doesn't know the far reaches of his full potential. But nonetheless, as Bedlam, he just destroys these techno demons, which once again is just insane. But after doing so, he's then met by the arrival of Darkoth, the Death Demon, which shows us once again that time is doing something funny, because Darkoth ruled at a different time from Belasco, from Sim, from Illyana, and on top of that, this dude is definitely not Madeline Pryor, not even close. And for Bedlam, seeing this and knowing that Madeline Pryor was the ruler of Limbo when he left New York, this now gives him the indication that the time is getting very trippy here. Because as we're told, if you put enough pressure on a moment in Limbo, it can split. And that is precisely what happens here as we see Bedlam go to attack Darkoth. And the timeline splits where you now have two Bedlams and two Darkoths fighting in separate 1v1s. And it's crazy how this unfolds, because with the first outcome, you got Darkoth on top. Because as soon as Bedlam goes to attack, Darkoth slices him open with the Soul Sword. But in the mirrored fracture of this moment, where it plays out differently, Bedlam takes the Soul Sword before Darkoth can swing. While still in Timeline 1, Darkoth still has the Soul Sword, and he remains unscathed. But then we're going back to Timeline 2, with Bedlam taking the sword, he breaks it. But then back in Timeline 1, Darkoth, who still has the Soul Sword, he then goes on to attack Bedlam with his fire horns. And really through the course of this, you have Timeline 1 where Darkoth is winning, and then Timeline 2 where Bedlam is winning. Because in Timeline 2, after Bedlam took the Soul Sword, he broke it, and then he jammed both ends into Darkoth's head, only to then remove Darkoth's head from his body. And it's a crazy unfolding of events, because with their fight in Limbo splitting into two different timelines, Al Ewing brilliantly uses this detail about Limbo with the way that time acts weird here, which, like we've talked about, it's a detail that's been around for decades, but the way he uses it here to bring everything together, it's nuts. Because in each of these timelines, there's a different winner, because the Bedlam who killed Darkoth, the Bedlam who won, his regrowing memory shows him the two people that he wants to hit the most, which of course are his past selves. And at a moment's notice, a doorway opens, showing him his past two selves in the garden, and right away, the winning Bedlam heads through, making his way into Meridius's garden at the end of time. But even still, with him heading there, I feel like he needs to fix that eye just before he pops up, like Meridius had mentioned during Dark Web. But nonetheless, with this leading to Bedlam making his way to the garden, we're one step closer to connecting the dots. But on the other end, where Darkoth wins, this is where Ewing is really just showing off, because he ends this perfectly. Because in this timeline where Darkoth wins, by stabbing Bedlam with the Soul Sword, this moment also gives birth to the Bedlam Child symbiote. Because in this timeline, with Darkoth winning, the Soul Sword destroyed Bedlam, and it sent Eddie falling once again. And we'll talk about where he went in just a moment, because we gotta finish talking about where Darkoth is going. Because for Darkoth, with him killing Bedlam, the offspring of Bedlam latched on to Darkoth since he was the only one there. But then next, a very familiar random stepping disc opens, leading to Asgard. And for Darkoth, without a thought, he goes through it in an attempt to get away from this symbiote goo, which from here is then continued in Thor issue 27. Which we talked about 6 months ago. But no worries, I got a link below in case you're just tuning in and you want to see how this continues for Darkoth and the Bedlam Child symbiote going forward. But with that happening, I gotta say this, because with this issue retroactively showing us how Darkoth's reign ended, it's perfect. Because prior to this, all we really knew is that he was just there alone. And I mean, we saw him at times in issues of Excalibur, but at that time there wasn't a story that ended his reign and wrapped it up neatly with a bow until now. So again, the split timeline thing was just brilliant. It was genius, because for one, it was Limbo, but also when the time was split, giving us 2 extra members, Ewing handled them as well. But with discovering what happened to these 4 members, if you will, we talked about the Darkoth who won and the Darkoth who died. We talked about the Bedlam who won, but for the Bedlam who died, we're not quite finished yet. Because for the dead Bedlam, much like Eddie's death at the beginning of the series when we saw him die, this death also sends Eddie falling again. But this time we find him arriving on a path that will lead him to the engine room, but also it's here where going forward we'll finally get to learn about the 7th Venom. But as for now, all that we're really told is that with Eddie having fallen so far for so long, he's finally getting the helping hand that he's very much needed. And I can't wait to see how this eventually comes together, because now with the Limbo split, Eddie's been given the opportunity to take a different path from the one that Meridius has thrown him into. And I can't wait to see how it fully develops, because we've already heard Meridius express uncertainties about his future success within this symbiote secret war, if you will. So yeah, I'm definitely locked in on this one. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/Dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.